John's going to be very, very immodest and introduce himself. But I will say welcome to our next session, which is what was the title? Why the hell are we here? Or is it worth bothering? Is it? Yeah, we've had the privilege of working with John Carr, who's been working on these areas of online child protection for, well, I'm sure he'll tell us exactly how long, but for many times more years than I have, and is Secretary of the Children's Charities Coalition for Internet Safety. So I will leave it at that. Over to you, John.
Okay. Yeah, so academic lawyer is my original background. And I used to, in 1995, I started writing a column for a political magazine, the sort of liberal intellectual magazine called Prospect, about the internet. And it was aimed at people who were interested in public policy, but were not technically minded. They didn't know anything about the tech. So I was writing this monthly column for this magazine called Prospect. It's still around. And somebody from a children's organization read my column. I mean, amazing. And they rang me up, literally. They did that kind of thing then, in those days. They rang me up and said, John, we like the way you write. It's great. You know, you kind of speak in a very comprehensible way. And this internet thing that you're talking about, the column was called The Net Position, by the way. I thought of that title myself. I was rather proud of that. This internet thing, it's going to be important for kids, isn't it? And I said, well, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that angle, but I guess so. Yeah, sure. So this was NCH Action for Children, Methodist Church's biggest children's bit, as it were. Then the biggest children's organization in Britain. They asked me if I would come along and tell them about the internet just for a couple of weeks, and they'd pay me. So immediately they had my attention. And I was with them for 11 years. And so in that 11 years, I was teaching them about tech and the internet and so on, and they were teaching me about child protection stuff. And so it was completely accidental, completely fortuitous, but that's how I got involved in it. And the difference between then and now, I mean, it's an unrecognizable, the whole space that we're in now. And I'll just tell you a story specifically around the age verification stuff, since that's the main item. Some of you will have heard this story before, but some of you haven't. So around 2002, 2003, we got parents coming to see some of our member organizations, NSPCC, Barnardo's, Children's Society, telling them that their children, typically 14 or 15-year-old boys, had been diagnosed as gambling addicts. And they explained in some detail what that meant. So like me and my wife, when our kids went to big school at the age of 11, yeah, we opened up bank accounts for them with the NatWest, so a big high street bank, very respectable. And as part of the standard package, because we wanted to, you know, teach them about money, and we'd pay their pocket money into their bank account, all that kind of stuff. At the start of the standard package that our kids got, aged 11, was a debit card. And so all over Britain, from around that time, and it coincided broadly with 3G arriving, so fast mobile connection started also becoming a feature of young people's lives. So any possibility of close parental supervision had basically gone out the window. But anyway, so about the same time, all over the country, you got kids from the age of 11 years upwards with debit cards, and they had the ability to go to gambling websites run by William Hill, Ladbrokes, tick a box to say that they were 18, then blow their money on a horse or a football match or whatever. And then, this was the bit where the addict bit came in, they would steal stuff from their money, cash, from their parents or friends, or they'd steal objects, which they then converted to cash, put the cash into their bank accounts with the debit, which they could use with the debit card, and then go back onto the website and blow it, as I said, on a horse or a football match or whatever it would be. So we went to see William Hill's and Ladbrokes and all of these big gambling companies who ran these gambling websites, and we said to them, this is wrong. These are 14 or 15-year-old boys. They shouldn't be able to bet at all. The law's very clear. You have to be 18 to be able to place a bet or in any kind of place where you get on the track or in a bookies. And it's just the same, should be just the same on the internet, although that nobody at that point had made that explicit, if you see what I mean. And there were certainly no laws explicitly addressing that point. And they all said the same thing. We are very aware of this problem. We take it very, very seriously. But there isn't a solution available. We don't know how to sort of stop it. If we stopped everybody with a debit card from betting, we would be discriminating against all kinds of people who had adults who got a perfectly legitimate right to bet with us. Privately, what they said, not publicly, but privately, what they said was, look, it's very simple. We know this is wrong. There probably are things that we could do, introduce more friction into the onboarding process, you know, the process by which you get an account with one of these gambling companies. But if we do that, and we're the first or amongst the few to do it, we know perfectly well that our competitors won't. So the only thing that will happen, and it's entirely predictable, is we will lose business and market share to the other companies who will not follow our lead because they don't have to. So they did nothing. I mean, they kept saying they cared about it. They kept saying publicly they cared, it was very serious and all that kind of stuff. But actually, in reality, they did nothing, even though they knew there were things they could do. So then the government, Tony Blair's government, announced a review of gambling policy as a whole in 2003, that was. And there was nothing in there about kids and the internet and online gambling. So we lobbied as the bill was going through Parliament. We said, this is happening and it's wrong. Everybody agreed it was wrong. I said, what you should do is you should make it a condition of getting a license to operate a gambling website in the United Kingdom. You should make it a condition that the online companies have an effective and robust age verification system. Everybody said we were mad. It was insane. There wasn't a mechanism. It didn't exist. There wasn't an age verification industry or any established mechanisms online to age verify anybody. So we said, well, that may be true, but it's still wrong, and it shouldn't be like that. And Parliament passed the law. What happened then? Capitalism did its magic. The new law had created a new market. Business people spotted that. They invested in developing, the credit agencies and others started investing in and adapting stuff to be able to make online age verification possible. And we saw the growth of that then taking place to the position today where we've got 650 people attending this conference in Manchester, either in person or online. It's quite remarkable the way it's moved. So that made Britain, by the way, the first country in the world to make it a legal requirement to have to age verify anything that was being sold over the internet or provided over the internet. And I feel very proud to have had a part to play in making that happen. Now, the truth was, by the way, if we as children's groups had had a choice in the matter, we would have gone for porn first, because there's no question, when the internet first burst on the scene, one of the major anxieties that parents and children, it wasn't just boring old farts like me, one of the main things that parents and kids themselves felt was bad and wrong about the where the internet was working was the way in which it was providing instant and ready access to what we would now call hardcore pornography. But the fact is that isn't what happened. The gambling review came first. So opportunistically, we jumped in, lobbied on it, and we got it. And looking back on it, that was kind of smart and fortuitous in a way, because since that gambling law came into effect, which it did on the 1st of September 2007, we've not been aware of a single case where a kid was able to go to a gambling website, tick a box to say they were 18 or above, and then go on and place a bet and blow their pocket money on a horse or a football match or whatever. So in a way, doing it with gambling, and we had the anti-money laundering rules and so on as well, which helped us out with making the case for it, turned out to be fortuitous, because then we could say to anybody and everybody, look, it's working in gambling, so it can work for you. So we started agitating on the question of porn, but that wasn't the only thing we were doing. Some of the other things that were happening about then, there were reports appearing in the press, and we were hearing from parents about kids ordering a case of vodka or beer online and not having to, and it being delivered to their house or their flat or whatever. And they'd even, like you can leave messages to the delivery company, just leave it in the garage or just leave it next to the dustbin. So the delivery people didn't even see who they were delivering it to. The big supermarket chains and others were selling alcohol over the internet, again, just asking people to tick a box to say they were over 18. So I went to see Tesco's, I went to see Safeways, those are the two, and Asda. So I went to my hometown of Leeds, which is where Asda then had its national headquarters, and said, you guys are delivering alcohol to children. And I said, oh no, we're not. Because when our drivers take the alcohol, they ask to see somebody's as proof of age before they will hand over the goods. What I didn't tell these people at the beginning of the conversation, I did at the end, was my best mate worked for the Transport and General Workers Union, right, as it was then called. This was the trade union that organised the drivers who worked for Safeway, Asda, Tesco, and so on. And I'd been to see her and said, what is actually happening with your members when they're out delivering alcohol or anything? Is it true that they're asking for age checks? She said, no. She actually put it slightly in rather more brusque language than that. A lot of the drivers were on job and finish, right? So they'd turn up at the depot or the distribution point in the morning, whenever it was. They had a certain number of jobs to do that day. The sooner they finished those jobs, they were done. They could go off and run their taxi business or their second job or whatever it was and earn some more money. They were delivering, for example, to a high-rise block, a 30-story block of flats, carrying the can of vodka or the case of vodka or whatever it might be up to the top, probably illegally parked because there wasn't anywhere for them to park properly or legally. The idea, says my friend at the Transport and General Workers Union, that they're going to wait for 5 minutes, maybe longer, while somebody rummaged around trying to find some way of proving that they were over 18 before they handed over the goods, was simply absurd. It wasn't happening. So there we had another example of big business, fully aware of what was ought to have been fully aware of what was going on, but doing nothing about it. Same with knives. The same companies that were selling alcohol over the internet without verifying in a reliable way who was buying what, were also selling knives over the internet to begin with, okay? And then there were cases where kids who bought a knife over the internet had stabbed somebody, and then it emerged in court that they got it delivered by Waitrose or Tesco or whoever it might be. That was solved fairly quickly. They just stopped selling knives over the internet completely. Now on the question of alcohol and tobacco, it was the same with tobacco, they do have much more robust processes in place, both at the point of sale by having age verification stuff in there, and also I am now reasonably confident that they will not now, and Amazon won't either, hand over stuff with an age restricted law applying to it at any rate, unless they are satisfied that the person they're handing it to, at least, as opposed to the ultimate consumer, but they can't have any control over that, meets the kind of legal age minimum. That's quite a long journey that we came on. But of course, we still had the issue of porn there as a kind of really, I was going to say a really hot issue. That's probably not the right choice of words. But anyway, you understand it was always a priority issue for us. because one of the points about porn, from a child protection point of view, at any rate, was exposure to pornography absolutely without question leads to the early sexualization of children. It's used by paedophiles to groom children in an inappropriate way for illegal sexual behavior. So we were always very, very keen to see the maximum possible obstacles placed in the way, specifically age verification, strong age verification, put in the way of children to stop them accessing or being exposed to this material which they couldn't get easily or at all in the physical world, was instantly available to them on the online world. And every single porn company I knew about, and I did meet one or two of them, were very clear. You know, they said on their webpage, you must be an adult to come in here. That was a come on. It wasn't a serious effort to keep children out. It was a way of saying, yeah, guys, you've hit the right place. Everything that you see from now on is going to be pornography that's meant for adults. So come on in and enjoy yourself. So again, none of the porn companies have ever done anything, had never done anything meaningful to restrict children's access to the material that they were publishing, even though, and I'm sure they genuinely meant it, they didn't want children on their sites. They had no money. They had no, they weren't deliberately trying to expose kids to porn, but because of the business model, they didn't want to volunteer to be the people to introduce friction and barriers to anybody's access to what they were trying to sell or circulate and distribute, because if they did, it would lose them business. And by the way, we subsequently got proof of that when the French authorities tried to implement an age verification rule for porn companies, and they did it very, very badly, picking only on a small range of big sites. And what they saw immediately was the traffic all started shifting to the smaller sites where the French authorities were not trying to enforce the age verification rule that they'd implemented. I think that I'm not completely up to speed on what's happening now in France, but I do think the French government acknowledged that hadn't perhaps got that completely right, and they're looking at it again. But I am pleased to say that now, as you will know, well, I don't know if everybody in here does know, so I'll just make it clear, under the Online Safety Act that became law in October of last year, porn companies will now be covered in exactly the same way as gambling companies are. It will be a legal obligation. Howsoever you provide access to pornography over the internet, you will be required to have an age verification process, a robust age verification process, which means it has to be privacy compliant as well, approved by the Information Commissioner's Office and so on, as part of the, it'll be a legal obligation. Ofcom are drawing up the regulations on it now, so we're still waiting to see exactly what that means in practice, and there are one or two rather worrying signs about how Ofcom are interpreting the law. My view is very clear. Parliament intended it to be the case that there will be no exceptions, like there are no exceptions on alcohol or cigarettes, which say if you're a small vendor of tobacco or alcohol, you don't have to do age verification, or you don't have to take the same steps to make sure it's secure. So anybody who publishes, intentionally publishes pornography, whether it's commercially or otherwise, should be introducing robust age verification to make sure kids are not part of it, are not being able to access it, whether it's on social media, whether it's on or just a straightforward porn publishing website. It's going to be tricky for some of the social media companies. They're going to have to introduce internal divisions or checks within their platforms, but they're already sort of moving in that direction anyway. It's going to be, it's much more straightforward if your whole business is based on publishing porn, to have age verification as a requirement to access it. Less straightforward if you're a large social media platform, where porn is only a part of what's available. Like I'm thinking of Twitter, for example. But nevertheless, that's what the law now says, and we're waiting to see what final regulations emerge from Ofcom, and to see how effective that law will be. I could talk for quite a long time about the history of things that have happened in the child protection space. I was a vice president of MySpace 4 days a week. I never actually completely abandoned my role as a child protection advocate in the UK, even though technically I was employed in Los Angeles by MySpace. I was on Microsoft's policy board for Europe, the Middle East and Africa. I've worked for Google, Vodafone, Disney. I've worked for a lot of American big tech companies. But I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about what it was like to be vice president for Europe on the trust and safety for MySpace. And vice president is an odd title. You know, it can mean absolutely nothing. It doesn't necessarily tell you that you're a very senior or important person in the hierarchy. But in truth, I was sort of an important person in the hierarchy, certainly for Europe in MySpace. But even so, the only things that we could decide entirely on our own in the MySpace office in London were the kind of coffee beans that we would have in the office, or what kind of pictures we would hang on the wall, or what kind of design or logos we would have on the staff newsletter, and how frequently the UK MySpace newsletter would be distributed to staff. Everything else of any significance went to the West Coast of America to be decided or examined first by the lawyers and the economists and the accountants, and then word would come back, often quite quickly, I have to say, I mean, depending on how serious or big the issue was, but nevertheless, it was completely clear that there was nobody working for the company in Europe, nobody working for the company anywhere other than on possibly New York or the West Coast of America who made any decisions of any significance in relation to that company. So we need to bear that in mind when we meet with and deal with, and there's a couple of people in the room who fulfilled this role, not mentioning any names, Luke, definitely not mentioning any names. When we meet people in Europe who work for the big American companies, formerly, what is it? We're dealing with the oily rag, not the engineer, is how we would have said it in Leeds many, many years ago. We're dealing with messengers, not with decision takers. Real information relays that work between, you know, both sides of the Atlantic. Where this became acutely difficult, I was involved in negotiating 4 different codes of practice. And when the whole of sort of child safety policy was under the auspices of the Home Office, they had this thing called the Home Secretary's Task Force on Child Internet Safety. It was set up by Jack Straw in 2001. It was reconstituted as the UK Council for Child Internet Safety after the Byron Report in 2008. I was a member all of that time. I only ceased to be a member of it in 2017. But during that early phase, when it was the Home Secretary's task force, and initially into the first years of the Cameron government, I was involved in negotiating 4 separate voluntary codes of practice with big tech. Every single dot and comma on every single page was argued over. No agreements about a document, you know, finalizing a document, were ever taken on the day in the room. Actually, you would have been part of some of that then, as I recall, Luke. No final decisions were ever made in the room on the day on a text that we'd just been discussing, because every document had to go back to America for somebody in America to read, interrogate the people further, and then come back with a yes or a no. And very often it was a yes. I mean, very often the people representing the companies did know the limits of their authority. They were aware of how far they could go, but very often they weren't, because it's in the nature of a discussion and a negotiation that things change. So as I said, very often, you know, we would have these very long discussions, argue about commas, meanings of word, blah, 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 agree a text in the room, but it was always provisional. And that is a very, very, very frustrating and time-consuming process. But here's the other thing about that process. There's us, the children's organisations, me, my sidekick from the NSPCC. There's kind of 8 lawyers, you know, on the other side of the table. It's going to be much worse now. Now that and these are all for voluntary codes, right? Now that the codes are legal documents with legal force, God knows how that process is going to work out. But what is very, very clear is it is an exceptionally uneven playing field. We as children's organizations are never going to be able to compete with the likes of Google and Microsoft and the other big tech companies. But we are so far off the pace on some of this stuff that it is really, really unfair. And Ofcom is going to have to find a way of getting resources to civil society organizations, such as a children's organization, to try to make the debate and the discussion and the process a bit fairer. One last thing, because the time police have been waving their finger at me. Some of you may have seen this reported in the press. There's an organization in the United States called Net Choice, right? Its mission, and I'll quote verbatim its mission is to defend free enterprise and free speech on the internet. Okay, that's its mission, right? In 2020, its annual income was $2,000. Okay, in 2022, its annual income was $34,000. The only thing that NetChoice actually does to give effect to its mission to defend free enterprise and free speech on the internet is take to court every single federal, state, or city piece of legislation that tries to introduce any kind of regulation on anything connected with the internet. And the reason for that is very straightforward. They don't mind if they lose, but if they delay the process by 5 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever it might be, and the status quo is maintained, that's money in the bank for the people who are giving them the money to take these cases to court in the first place. So I'm very glad we've got the Online Safety Act in place in the United Kingdom. I think it's world-breaking, exciting legislation. It's not going to be easy, some of it, but at least we're going to give it a go, and everybody is watching to see how it works out here before they jump themselves. There you go. There's my tour de force, my tour d'horizon and history. Thank you for listening.
Wants to go to lunch, can, and anyone wants to ask maybe a question or two can.
Question, George?
Yes.
Thanks, John. What kind of coffee beans did you choose at the MySpace office? No, I'm joking. That's not my question.
Ethiopian.
Okay. My question is, with the gambling industry, I wasn't around when all of those movements were happening, but presumably they have, as you've said, people wearing nice suits and nice offices, and they're willing to talk to you. With the porn industry, having worked at Ofcom on the Part 5 guidance, it's hard to find an email of someone who works for some of these companies, and these are huge multinational tech companies. So I guess my question is, have you seen over the past 10, 15 years, any movement in that industry towards kind of professionalization, towards having more of a PR operation, being more willing to talk?
Oh, yeah.
Or do you think Ofcom are gonna have to just enforce?
Well, OnlyFans definitely changed, and it's a British company. I mean, that was one of the reasons. They were very concerned about what future lay ahead of them in this country if they didn't change. But here's the thing about OnlyFans, by the way. When I tell people in America that we say nice things about OnlyFans, they were completely horrified, because the OnlyFans haven't changed their behavior in the States. They have changed their behavior in the United Kingdom, but not over there. So the same sorts of complaints that we were making about OnlyFans in the United Kingdom, apparently, I mean, I haven't looked into it, but I'm telling you what people, I mean, I was in Washington not that long ago, and that's what people were saying. They were astonished. So yes, there's no question that certainly one big part of the adult industry, I know OnlyFans isn't just about porn and sex services, but that's a big part of it, has changed. And certainly when Pornhub, ALO, whatever they're called now, they responded when MasterCard and Visa threatened to withdraw their payments facilities. So they're not immune to pressures, but I'm afraid unless and until the law changes and compels them to do something, they won't introduce they won't introduce age verification. Not on for the same reasons that the gambling companies wouldn't. They know it's coming. They just want to delay having to do it for as long as possible. Anybody else?
Other questions? I actually wanted to make a comment. I don't know how easy it would be to get the episode over here, but about maybe 6 months ago, South Park released an episode called Not Suitable for Children, and OnlyFans was one of the big themes throughout it, but it is definitely the most over-the-top South Park that I think I've seen. And when Ian was over a couple of months ago, I made him watch it, and he was snapping pictures and laughing hysterically because it was right up the alley of child protection and child exploitations and everything that would go on in OnlyFans, et cetera, things like that. So I would recommend for the crowd that we have assembled here to try to check out that.
But it does underline the point that the way OnlyFans behaves here, and the police, they're always saying nice things about OnlyFans now, but it's not working in the same way.
Right.
And just to be, by the way, I have sympathy for the people who earn a living through OnlyFans, but my job is not. I'm not the shop steward for sex workers. I'm not the shop stewards for people who make pornography. I'm a shop steward for kids. So we have to solve that problem. And if it does impact the incomes of the sex industry workers, I'm very sorry, but that is not my problem. Okay.
All right, thank you.
I didn't realize you were challenging Mark, and now it takes time.
Time, yeah. Okay, that's it, Dan. Go and eat.